Some inheritances are made of wood and nails. Others are made of secrets that refuse to stay buried. At 4:21 a.m., Atlas began digging beneath the cabin floor and would not stop. The sound of his claws scraping across old pine boards echoed through the darkness like a warning. Caleb Walker sat upright on the narrow cot, his pulse quickening before he was fully awake. The cabin was silent except for the winter wind pressing softly against the walls and the steady rhythm of Atlas tearing at the same spot near the stone fireplace. For a moment, Caleb simply listened. Years in the army had taught him that unusual sounds at unusual hours rarely meant nothing. Moonlight spilled through the dusty window, painting pale silver stripes across the floor. Atlas, a 6-year-old German shepherd with alert amber eyes and a coat of black and tan fur, barely acknowledged Caleb's presence. His ears remained forward, his focus absolute. Whatever had captured his attention was beneath the floorboards. Caleb swung his boots onto the cold wood and crossed the room. The cabin smelled faintly of old cedar, dust, and wood smoke left behind by another life. 3 days earlier, he had never even heard of this place. 3 days earlier, he had been sleeping in his aging pickup truck outside Missoula, Montana, wrapped in army blankets while snow gathered on the windshield. Life had become a collection of temporary parking lots and quiet mornings. Then the phone call came. A lawyer named Naomi Harper informed him that a distant uncle, Walter Walker, had passed away and left him a cabin near Seeley Lake. Caleb barely remembered Walter. The man had vanished into the mountains decades ago and seemed more like a family rumor than a relative. Yet somehow, Walter had left everything to him. Everything turned out to be a small log cabin hidden among towering pines and forgotten by nearly everyone. The locals seemed puzzled that anyone would want it. One man at the gas station even laughed and told Caleb he could have saved the gas money because nobody would buy the place if it were listed for $1. Caleb hadn't cared. A roof was still a roof. After months of sleeping in his truck, the cabin felt like a miracle. Yet Atlas had acted strangely from the moment they arrived. He circled the property repeatedly. He paused beside certain walls as if listening. More than once he stood perfectly still, staring at the floor with unusual intensity. Now standing beside him in the moonlit room, Caleb saw why the dog had refused to let it go. Atlas suddenly stopped digging. His nose pressed into the shallow hole between two floorboards. Caleb knelt and brushed away loose dust. Something metallic caught the moonlight. His fingers closed around the object and carefully lifted it free. A rusted military identification tag rested in his palm. Time had darkened the metal, but not enough to hide the faint stains clinging to its surface. Caleb turned it over. His breath caught. 2 initials were engraved on the back, W.W. Walter Walker. The cabin creaked softly around him as the wind moved through the trees outside. Atlas sat beside him, watching quietly now as though his job was finished. Caleb stared at the tag for a long moment. If Walter had hidden this beneath the floor, what else had he hidden? And why did it feel like Atlas had known the answer long before he did? Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of weathered steel. Thin sunlight filtered through the pines surrounding the cabin, turning the frost on the branches into silver glass. Caleb sat at the small kitchen table with a mug of black coffee growing cold in his hands. The rusted military tag rested beside it. Atlas lay near the front door, but unlike most mornings, he was not sleeping. His ears twitched at every sound outside. Caleb picked up the tag again and turned it over. "What were you trying to tell me, Walter?" he asked quietly. Atlas lifted his head immediately. "Yeah, I know," Caleb said with a faint smile. "You probably want answers, too." By late morning, he drove into Seeley Lake. The town felt frozen in another decade. Old storefronts lined the main road. Pickup trucks sat parked outside family-owned businesses. The mountains stood watch in every direction. Caleb stopped at a small diner with a faded sign that read Cedar Ridge Cafe. Inside, the smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. A waitress with gray hair approached his booth. "You are not from around here," she said. "That obvious," Caleb replied. "The beard says traveler. The dog says military." She glanced toward Atlas, who was lying calmly beside the booth. "Good-looking shepherd. Best partner I ever had." She smiled. "What brings you to Seeley Lake?" Caleb hesitated. "Inherited a cabin." The waitress laughed softly. "Would that be Walter Walker's place?" Caleb looked up. "You knew him?" Everybody knew Walter. Strange man, kept to himself, never caused trouble. She refilled his coffee. "Folks said he spent more time talking to the trees than people. Did he have family around here?" "Not that I ever saw." She paused. "But every few months somebody would come asking questions about that cabin." Caleb frowned. "Questions? Mostly buyers." The waitress shrugged. "Never made much sense. That old place is falling apart." Atlas suddenly stood, his ears locked toward the front window. A black luxury SUV rolled slowly past the diner. The dog gave a low growl. Caleb followed his gaze. The vehicle continued down the street before disappearing around the corner. "That dog sees things before the rest of us," the waitress said quietly. "Usually," Caleb replied. After lunch, he stopped at the county records office. The building was small and nearly empty. A clerk named Susan helped him search property records. 10 minutes later, she looked genuinely confused. "This is odd." "What is?" Caleb asked. She tapped the screen. Over the last 15 years, there were 7 separate attempts to purchase Walter's land. 7? And every offer came from companies connected to the same investor. Caleb leaned forward. "Who?" Before she could answer, a voice came from behind him. "Victor Kane." Caleb turned. A tall man in an expensive leather jacket stood near the doorway. His silver hair was neatly combed. His smile looked practiced. "You must be Caleb Walker," the man said. "I was hoping we would meet." Atlas stepped between them immediately. The German shepherd's posture became rigid. Victor glanced at the dog and chuckled. "Friendly fellow." Caleb rested a hand on Atlas's shoulder. "Depends on the company." Victor's smile never changed. "Fair enough. I simply wanted to welcome you to town." He reached into his pocket and handed over a business card. "If you ever decide that cabin is too much trouble, give me a call." Caleb looked at the card. "You seem pretty interested in that property." Victor's eyes flickered for the briefest moment. "Just business." As Victor walked away, Atlas continued staring after him, not barking, not growling, just watching, the same way he had watched the floor before finding Walter's tag. And for the first time since arriving in Sealy Lake, Caleb felt certain of one thing. Atlas did not trust Victor Kane at all. The drive back to the cabin felt longer than usual. Gray clouds drifted low over the mountains, and the pine forests seemed darker than they had that morning. Caleb kept one hand on the steering wheel, while Atlas sat upright in the passenger seat, staring out the window. Neither of them seemed eager to return, yet both knew they would. The cabin was no longer just a place to sleep. It was becoming a question that demanded an answer. By late afternoon, the truck rolled into the clearing. The old cabin stood exactly where it always had, quiet beneath the towering trees. Caleb stepped out and stretched his back. "All right, partner," he said. "Let us see what your instincts are trying to tell us." Atlas jumped down and immediately headed for the front porch. Instead of entering, he paused near the wall beside the stone chimney. His ears rotated forward. His nose moved slowly across the weathered logs. Caleb watched carefully. "You heard something again?" Atlas glanced back briefly before returning to the same spot. The behavior was impossible to ignore. Inside, the cabin felt colder than before. The winter air had settled into every corner. Caleb added wood to the stove and lit a small fire. Orange light flickered across the walls while shadows danced over the ceiling beams. The military tag remained on the table where he had left it. He picked it up once more. W.W. Walter Walker. The initials felt heavier now. Atlas paced across the room and stopped near the fireplace. Then he did something unusual. He barked once. Not loudly, not urgently, just once. Caleb looked up immediately. "Show me." Atlas lowered his head and sniffed the floorboards surrounding the fireplace. The dog moved in a slow circle before stopping beside a narrow section of floor that looked no different from the rest. Caleb crouched down. He knocked lightly against the wood. Most of it produced a solid sound. One section did not. It echoed hollow. Caleb froze. "Well now," he whispered. Atlas wagged his tail once. Caleb fetched a flashlight and a screwdriver from his truck. Kneeling beside the fireplace, he carefully worked the tip into a narrow crack between 2 boards. The wood resisted at first. Then a hidden panel shifted slightly. Dust rose into the beam of the flashlight. Atlas immediately stepped closer. "Easy," Caleb said. "We are getting somewhere." The panel lifted just enough to reveal a small compartment beneath the floor. Inside lay a weathered canvas pouch covered in decades of dust. Caleb stared at it for several seconds before reaching inside. The material felt dry and brittle. He placed it on the floor and slowly opened the flap. Atlas sat beside him so quietly that Caleb could hear the dog's steady breathing. Inside the pouch rested an old notebook wrapped in oilcloth. Beneath it was a folded map yellowed by age. Caleb unfolded the first page of the notebook. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. The date at the top read June 14, 1974. His eyes moved to the first sentence. The warmth from the fire suddenly felt very far away. Written across the page were 7 words that made the room seem smaller. "If you are reading this, they finally found me." The fire crackled softly while snow drifted past the cabin windows. Caleb sat motionless at the table, the notebook open beneath the glow of a lantern. Atlas remained beside him, alert but calm, his amber eyes fixed on the pages as if he understood their importance. Caleb read the sentence again. If you are reading this, they finally found me. A chill moved through him that had nothing to do with the weather. He turned the page. Walter's handwriting remained steady. For years I believed distance would be enough. I was wrong. Some secrets do not stay buried. Some people do not stop looking. Caleb frowned. Looking for what? He murmured. Atlas lifted his head. The next pages described Walter's arrival at the cabin decades earlier. He had built additions with his own hands, repaired the roof every spring, and lived quietly among the pines. Yet woven between ordinary entries were strange references, deliveries that never arrived, vehicles parked on distant roads, footprints appearing after fresh snowfall. Caleb read for nearly an hour before one entry caught his attention. June 22, 1974, the man from Helena came again, asked questions he already knew the answers to, pretended he was interested in buying land. Caleb leaned back slowly. That sounds familiar. Atlas's ears twitched. Caleb thought about Victor Kane, the expensive jacket, the polished smile. The repeated offers to buy property that nobody seemed to want. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the porch. Atlas stood immediately and faced the front door. "What is it?" Caleb asked. The dog remained perfectly still. Then came the sound. A vehicle engine somewhere beyond the trees, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Caleb extinguished the lantern and moved toward the window. Through a narrow gap in the curtains, he could see headlights flickering between the pines near the old access road. They remained there for several seconds before disappearing. No vehicle approached the cabin, no door slammed. Whoever it was had simply stopped and left. Caleb let the curtain fall. "Maybe I am imagining things," he said quietly. Atlas continued staring toward the darkness, or maybe Walter was not. Returning to the table, Caleb unfolded the map found inside the hidden compartment. It showed the cabin property and several acres surrounding it. Most of the markings looked ordinary until he noticed a small red circle drawn near the northern edge of the land. Beside it, Walter had written 3 words, "Not the first entrance." Caleb stared at the note. "First entrance?" he whispered. Atlas immediately walked over and placed his nose directly on that section of the map. Caleb laughed softly despite himself. "You always know the interesting parts." As he folded the map, a small piece of paper slipped from between the pages of the notebook. It fluttered onto the floor. Caleb picked it up and turned it over. On one side was a faded photograph of a much younger Walter standing beside another man in military fatigues. On the back was a handwritten name, Richard Kane. Caleb's expression hardened. He looked toward the business card Victor had given him earlier. The same last name, the same family, and suddenly the repeated offers for the cabin no longer felt like business at all. The next morning arrived bright and cold. Fresh snow covered the clearing around the cabin, turning the world outside into a blanket of white silence. Caleb stood on the porch holding a cup of coffee, while Atlas surveyed the tree line. The German shepherd seemed unusually focused, his gaze fixed toward the northern section of the property, marked on Walter's map. "You are thinking about it too, aren't you?" Caleb asked. Atlas flicked one ear. "Yeah, me too." After breakfast, Caleb folded the map and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Within minutes, they were hiking through the forest. The air smelled of pine and frozen earth. Snow crunched beneath their boots and paws as they followed an old trail barely visible beneath decades of growth. According to the map, the red circle sat nearly half a mile north of the cabin. Walter's note repeated itself in Caleb's mind, "Not the first entrance." Whatever that meant, Walter had considered it important enough to hide. Atlas moved ahead confidently. Every so often, he stopped and looked back as if making sure Caleb was keeping up. "You missed your calling," Caleb said. "You should have been a tour guide." The dog continued forward without acknowledging the joke. Nearly 40 minutes later, Atlas stopped abruptly beside a large granite outcrop rising from the forest floor. Snow rested across its surface in smooth white curves. Caleb studied the area. Nothing seemed unusual. No cave, no structure, no obvious entrance. "This is it?" he asked. Atlas immediately began sniffing along the base of the rock. Caleb followed. Several minutes passed. Then Atlas pawed at a patch of snow near a cluster of bushes. Caleb knelt and brushed the snow aside. Beneath it lay something unexpected, a rusted metal post protruding from the ground. He cleared away more snow until faded lettering became visible. "Property marker 7. Caleb's pulse quickened. "Good find, partner." Looking around carefully, he noticed another marker farther ahead. Then another. The markers formed a rough line leading deeper into the woods. Someone had once wanted this path remembered. They followed the trail until the trees opened into a small clearing hidden from view on all sides. At its center stood the remains of an old wooden structure. Time had reduced most of it to weathered beams and collapsed walls. Caleb stepped closer. "This was here the whole time?" Atlas circled the ruins. Near what had once been a doorway, the dog stopped and stared downward. Caleb examined the ground. Most of it was covered by leaves and snow, but one section appeared strangely level. Too level. He knelt and brushed away debris. Beneath it was a square steel hatch no larger than a coffee table. His heartbeat accelerated. The hatch had no handle, no lock. Only a narrow groove running along one edge. Scratched into the metal were 3 words. Caleb leaned closer and read them aloud. If necessary, continue below. A cold wind moved through the clearing. Atlas stepped beside him and stared at the hatch. Somewhere beneath their feet, Walter Walker had left another secret waiting to be found. Caleb remained kneeling beside the steel hatch, while the wind whispered through the pines above. Atlas stood close enough that his shoulder brushed Caleb's arm. Neither seemed eager to move away. The hatch had been hidden too carefully to be ordinary. "Walter, what exactly were you protecting?" Caleb murmured. He ran his fingers along the groove and felt something shift beneath years of dirt and rust. After several minutes of clearing debris, he uncovered a recessed metal ring concealed beneath a layer of moss. "Well, that is encouraging," he said. Atlas gave a short huff. Caleb wrapped both hands around the ring and pulled. At first, nothing happened. Then a dull, metallic sound echoed beneath the ground. The hatch lifted several inches. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness below, carrying the scent of stone, cedar, and something much older. Caleb shined his flashlight inside. A narrow staircase descended beneath the forest floor. "Looks like we found the next chapter." Atlas immediately started down the stairs. "You never wait for permission, do you?" Caleb followed carefully. The passage extended nearly 20 feet underground before opening into a surprisingly large chamber. The walls were reinforced with timber beams. Shelves lined one side of the room. Dust covered everything, but the structure itself remained remarkably intact. Caleb slowly swept the flashlight around the space. Wooden crates sat stacked against one wall. A small desk occupied a corner. An old lantern rested beside a faded American flag folded neatly inside a glass case. Atlas moved through the room with quiet purpose, sniffing each corner. Caleb approached the desk. Several folders remained neatly arranged despite decades underground. He opened the first one and froze. Inside were military records, names, dates, reports, correspondence. Every document appeared carefully preserved. He opened another folder, then another. The same pattern continued. Walter had spent years collecting information. "This is not a hiding place," Caleb whispered. "This is an archive." Atlas stopped beside a filing cabinet and pawed at the bottom drawer. Caleb opened it. A single envelope lay inside. Across the front, written in Walter's handwriting, were the words, "For the walker who comes after me." Caleb swallowed hard before opening it. Inside was a letter. The paper crackled softly as he unfolded it. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and Atlas has probably already found what I could never fully hide." Caleb blinked. "You even predicted the dog." Atlas wagged his tail once. The letter continued. "Richard Kane and I served together many years ago. At first we trusted each other. Later I discovered things that changed everything. Some men wanted those truths forgotten. I refused." Caleb felt the room grow quieter with every sentence. Walter explained that certain records had disappeared after a government project ended unexpectedly. Official versions of events replaced the truth. Walter had preserved evidence proving what really happened. He had spent decades protecting it. At the bottom of the page, one final paragraph stood apart from the rest. "If Victor Kane ever learns what is beneath this forest, he will come for it. Do not trust his offers. Do not trust his promises. Above all else, do not let him reach the second vault." Caleb stared at the final words. Then he slowly lowered the letter. "Second vault?" he said aloud. Atlas immediately turned toward the far wall and began staring into the darkness beyond the shelves. Atlas did not move. He stood near the far wall of the underground chamber, staring at a section of rough timber hidden behind a row of shelves. Caleb folded Walter's letter and slipped it carefully into his jacket pocket before walking over. "You found something again, did you not?" The German shepherd glanced at him briefly and returned his attention to the wall. Caleb examined the shelves. They looked ordinary at first glance, filled with dusty binders, old supply boxes, and weathered equipment, yet something felt wrong. The shelves extended only halfway across the wall, leaving an unusual gap near the corner. He pushed gently against the wooden frame. Nothing happened. Then Atlas stepped forward and pressed his nose against one specific spot. Caleb smiled. "You make this look easy." He pushed again, harder this time. A faint click echoed through the chamber. The entire shelf shifted several inches. Caleb stepped back in surprise. Slowly, the hidden section swung inward, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Cool air drifted from the darkness. Atlas immediately entered. "Of course you are going first," Caleb said as he followed. The passage stretched nearly 30 feet before ending at a reinforced steel door built directly into the stone. Unlike everything else they had discovered, this door looked strong enough to survive generations. A small metal plaque was bolted beside it. Caleb brushed away the dust and read the inscription. Walker Archive 2. Protected until truth returns. He stared at the words for a moment. Walter really believed somebody would come looking. Atlas sat beside the door. His tail tapped the floor once. Caleb searched the frame carefully. Near the bottom, he found a small keyhole. The realization hit immediately, the military tag. He reached into his pocket and removed the rusted identification tag. Atlas had discovered beneath the cabin floor. Turning it over, he noticed something he had missed before. Along one edge was a tiny metal extension hidden beneath years of corrosion. It resembled a key. "You clever old man," Caleb whispered. He inserted it into the lock. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a heavy mechanism shifted deep inside the door. The sound echoed through the stone passage. The door slowly opened. Caleb swept his flashlight into the room beyond and stopped breathing for a moment. Shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of carefully organized boxes filled the space. Photographs, journals, maps, film reels, documents, decades of preserved history. At the center stood a wooden table. On it rested a single sealed box. Unlike everything else, it looked untouched by time. A note lay on top in Walter's handwriting. Caleb approached cautiously. The note contained only one sentence. "If you are standing here, you deserve to know what Richard Kane tried to hide." Caleb exchanged a glance with Atlas. The dog remained completely focused on the box. "I have a feeling this changes everything," Caleb said quietly. He reached for the lid. Before his fingers touched it, a distant sound echoed faintly through the underground passage. A door closing somewhere above ground. Caleb froze. Atlas instantly turned toward the tunnel. His ears rose. His body became rigid. Someone else had entered the property. Caleb carefully set the sealed box back onto the table. Every instinct he had developed over years of service told him the same thing. Somebody was nearby. Atlas stood motionless at the entrance to the vault, listening. The silence stretched for several seconds before faint footsteps echoed through the hidden passage. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. Caleb switched off his flashlight. The underground room fell into darkness except for a thin beam of daylight filtering from the distant tunnel. A voice eventually drifted through the shadows. "You found it faster than I expected." Caleb immediately recognized it. Victor Kane. Atlas released a low growl. "Easy boy," Caleb whispered. Victor appeared at the entrance moments later. He was alone. His expensive coat looked out of place among the stone walls and decades of forgotten history. His eyes moved across the shelves before settling on the sealed box. For the first time since meeting him, his polished smile disappeared. "My father spent years looking for this room," Victor said quietly. "Walter made sure he never found it." Caleb folded his arms. "Your father is Richard Kane." Victor nodded once. "You read the records, not all of them. Then let me save you time." Victor stepped forward slowly. "Walter believed he was protecting the truth. My father believed some truths only create more damage." Caleb glanced at the shelves surrounding them. "And what exactly is in that box?" Victor looked directly at it. "Proof." The single word lingered in the air. Caleb studied him carefully. There was no greed in Victor's voice now, only exhaustion. "Proof of what?" Victor hesitated before answering. "Proof that Walter spent 40 years carrying guilt that never belonged to him." Caleb felt his heartbeat quicken. That was not the answer he expected. Victor continued. "My father and Walter served together. Something went wrong during a classified operation. Walter blamed himself. My father spent the rest of his life trying to convince him otherwise." Atlas stopped growling. The dog simply watched. Victor slowly removed a folded photograph from his pocket and handed it to Caleb. The image showed Walter and Richard standing beside each other. Years earlier, both smiling, both young. Written beneath the photograph were 4 words, "Brothers until the end." Caleb looked up. "That does not sound like enemies." They were not. Victor's voice softened. "The story became twisted over time. Walter vanished. My father kept searching. Not for money, not for property, for his friend. The underground chamber suddenly felt different. Less like a vault and more like a conversation interrupted decades ago." Caleb stepped toward the sealed box and lifted the lid. Inside lay several journals, official reports, and a final letter. Walter's handwriting covered the first page. "To whoever finds this, Richard was never my enemy. He tried to help me carry a burden that belonged to nobody. If this box is opened, let the truth return both our names to peace." Caleb slowly lowered the letter. Across the room, Victor closed his eyes for a moment. Years of uncertainty seemed to leave his shoulders all at once. Atlas walked over and quietly sat beside him. Victor looked down at the German shepherd and laughed softly. I suppose that means I passed the inspection. Caleb smiled faintly, yet as he turned another page inside Walter's final journal, his expression changed. Tucked between the documents was a hand-drawn map, and at the bottom, written in fresh red ink, Walter had added one final message. The greatest secret was never hidden here. Caleb stared at the final message for a long moment while the underground chamber remained silent around him. Atlas sat at his side. Victor stood across the room, equally focused on the map Walter had left behind. Finally, Caleb folded the paper and smiled faintly. I think Walter spent his whole life trying to teach something. Victor nodded. And what is that? Caleb looked around the vault. That some things matter more than secrets. The map led them, nowhere dramatic, no hidden treasure, no forgotten fortune. Instead, it marked several locations across Montana where Walter and Richard had quietly helped veterans, widows, and struggling families over the years. Letters, stored in the vault, confirmed it. Every document told the same story. Whenever Walter found someone in need, he found a way to help without taking credit. Sometimes it was money. Sometimes it was repairs to a home. Sometimes it was simply giving a person another chance. Atlas rested his head on Caleb's knee while he read through the final journal. Near the end, Walter had written one last entry. If you are reading this, then the cabin has finally found its next caretaker. The records are important, but they are not the inheritance. The inheritance is the chance to keep doing good when nobody is watching. Caleb closed the journal slowly. For a man who had spent months sleeping in a truck, the words felt heavier than gold. A week later, the story began spreading through Seeley Lake. Historical records from the vault were donated to a museum archive. Walter and Richard's names were finally reunited in the public record. Old misunderstandings faded. Long unanswered questions received answers. One snowy afternoon, Caleb stood outside the cabin, watching volunteers unload boxes containing photographs and documents destined for preservation. Victor approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. Never thought I would be helping with this, he admitted. Caleb accepted the cup. Life surprises people. Victor laughed softly. My father would have liked you. I think he would have preferred Atlas. The German shepherd looked up at the sound of his name. Victor knelt and scratched behind the dog's ears. Atlas accepted the attention without protest. That alone said more than words ever could. Winter slowly turned into spring. Snow melted from the mountains. Wildflowers returned to the forest floor. The cabin changed too. Caleb repaired the porch, replaced broken windows, restored the old fireplace. What had once been a forgotten structure became a home. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, Caleb sat on the front steps with Atlas beside him. The forest glowed gold in the fading light. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, peaceful, quiet, familiar. Caleb reached down and scratched Atlas behind the neck. You knew, did not you? He asked. Atlas lifted his head. You knew there was something more here. The dog simply leaned against his leg. Caleb smiled. For the first time in years, he was not wondering where he would sleep tomorrow. He was not looking for the next parking lot or the next temporary solution. He was home. The cabin had given him shelter. Walter had given him purpose, but Atlas had given him the path to both. As the last light faded beyond the mountains, Caleb looked across the property and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not luck, not relief, belonging. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with friends who might enjoy it too. We would love to know where you are watching from. Tell us your city and country in the comments. More heartfelt and unforgettable hero dog stories are already waiting for you. See you in the next one.